This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. I'm your host, E.J. Iannelli. Joining me today in the Rogue Heart Media studio are Aimee Brooks and Morganne Elkins of Banana Slug Books. So welcome, Aimee, and welcome, Morganne.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I am really jazzed that you're here because I'm psyched about all things literary. And I'm also psyched about this anthology, Spokane Campfire Stories, that recently had a launch event. And I'm excited to talk about how that launch event went. But I figured before we get into that, I would really like to get into the genesis of Banana Slug Books, which, as I understand it, emerged either just ahead of a Saga grant, and I should clarify, Spokane Arts Grant Award, or was precipitated by a Saga grant.
They're kind of all wrapped up in one.
It's very the chronology is very messy.
Yes. Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to publish Spokane Campfire Stories, but I wanted a press behind it to be legitimate. And we worked on a press together. And so we are familiar with the ways that presses operate and what they do and the legitimacy that it can add behind a book project like this, especially a larger community book project or something that could fall in the basket of self-publishing. A press behind it can offer that extra push to get things through to booksellers and on the shelves.
Yeah, because vanity publishing or self-publishing, I mean, even the name alone, vanity publishing, it carries a certain stigma with it.
It does.
And so if you have an imprint, even if it's an imprint that's been kind of invented for the purpose of publishing that, lends it some legitimacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Aimee kind of had this idea for a campfire anthology project last summer, I think, right? Was when it was being born. And so she went after this Saga grant and created Banana Slug Books as, like she was saying, kind of the press behind the project. And then she pulled in myself and our other editors, Katy Shedlock and Dylan Cooper. And that's kind of the birth story, I guess, of the press.
And of course, Banana Slug isn't the first press to exist in Spokane. But when you say your involvement was with a press, is that Willow Springs?
Yes.
Okay, so it's we were talking just before we kind of hit the record button, and you had mentioned that you met in the program. The program being Eastern's Lit program.
Yes,
huh? Yeah.
Eastern's MFA program. So we served. There's two Willow Springs. There's Willow Springs Magazine and Willow Springs Books, and so we worked at Willow Springs Books also with Katy Shedlock, and then Dylan Cooper worked at Willow Springs Magazine. And so we were lead fiction and design editors back-to-back years. Katy was the poetry editor. And so it was such a small team, producing up to 3 books per year.
We did 4, I think, last year. It was a lot.
So we had our work cut out for us there. And so we were like, we know what it takes.
Yeah, we can do
We've
this.
done it before.
Aimee and I worked very closely. Aimee was a year above me in the MFA. And so I came in and Aimee kind of took me under her wing and showed me a lot about making a book. And we did, we figured it out as we went and then got a lot of skills between our collective.
We watched a lot of tutorials.
Oh my gosh, so much YouTube.
Which kind of fulfills the promise of the web. The web has disappointed in a lot of respects, but things like Wikipedia, things like YouTube tutorials, I think, thank heavens this exists.
Yes.
And shout out Polly Buckingham as well for helping us with InDesign.
So you had this idea for a literary anthology. Unfortunately, you had some of this real world experience behind you that you were able to put towards it. Now, this literary anthology obviously takes on kind of a geographic theme and also kind of an event theme, Spokane and Campfire. So what led to the combination of these two themes? And was it Spokane Campfire from the very beginning, or was it just geographically rooted?
I think even now I would consider it more geographically rooted than just Spokane. Spokane is broader than the city limits, and I think the stories reflect that. pretty well. We have a lot that are city center or in the very immediate surrounding area, and then some that branch out and follow us beyond the city limits, because Spokane, where the Spokane Nation roamed in the past, was pretty extensive. So I was like, I want to think about this in a pretty expansive way. And then I'm like a longtime camp counselor and love a campfire story and love people connecting. And so I wanted those things to come together. Whenever I started the MFA at Eastern, I came to build literary connections as well as making new friends, learning my craft, able to do things like work at Willow Springs Books and gain really valuable skills. But writing can be so lonely, and I think it shouldn't have to happen in a vacuum. And so things like this really bring people together. And so connection was really at the heart of this collection.
Yeah, and I think the word campfire and everything that evokes certainly lends itself to that theme, because the campfire story is a collective act. There's no point in, having a monologue in a campfire. So. And it came about pretty quickly too. So you hatched this idea in 2024, and then you were accepting submissions as late as something like, what was it, March of this year? Yeah. Yes. With 1 month to file through all of them and then read them and then say, hey, you've been selected for publication. Talk to me about that process.
So the Saga Grant is on a 1-year situation. And summer is the perfect campfire story time.
It's the time.
And we are unfortunately racing against a deadline. The departure of Morganne moving back to Maine.
Yeah, I moved back on 6 a.m. Saturday morning. So in 2 days from now, I will be driving cross country. So that was a part of our planning of the launch event.
I see. Okay.
To all be present. But really it was, I think, keeping it within that year deadline for the Saga Grant itself. So it did mean that we had pretty fast turnaround. The 4 of us were reading the submissions. We had multiple rounds of reading. I think we did 3 at least for all of the stories that we were submitted.
And this is you two, Katy and Dylan?
Yes, and Dylan. And I think the 4 of us read most of the stories that came in, and then we would have long meetings in Katy's living room talking about the various stories and if there were any revisions we wanted to go over with the authors. So that was a pretty lengthy part of the process, actually. I don't remember from start to finish how long that kind of went, but it took some time, but it was really worthwhile. It was so satisfying to be able to start to see the book taking shape as we were reading through what people were sending.
And I didn't tally up the end result, and I probably should have, but I'm curious as to how many ended up in the book. Is it 20?
23.
23. And how many submissions did you receive overall?
Ooh.
I don't remember.
30 something.
Yeah, it was in the 30s.
It was in mid 30s maybe, but I don't remember exactly. It's all a blur.
So, but an encouraging amount, but not so many that you had to turn, a lot of folks away, because that's always kind of a good test of a literary scene, is how many people are submitting to these things, even if not everyone can be published.
Yeah. And I think I have learned through this experience that maybe December is not a good time for a call with the holidays approaching. I think that a lot of people were traveling, and so we didn't really the submissions didn't start picking up until maybe mid-February.
And then we extended the call as well.
But this maybe should have been a story in its own right. Spokane is a very last-minute city, and so most people don't make up their minds to do anything until either a week or a few hours beforehand.
The RSVP for the launch party was blowing up a few hours before.
Yeah, we should have had you write a story about last-minute Spokane things.
So what sort of criteria did you have as you were making some of the selections? And I kind of want to talk about those parameters before we go into the folks and the stories that you did select. But what were some of the criteria that you were looking for?
Oral storytelling components were really centered in the collection. So we really wanted things that had strong sonic quality, something that Eric Woodard from Pivot has taught us through our collab event with him. is that storytelling is like a river. And I think that we probably didn't have that specific language whenever we were choosing the collection, but things that become a little bit confusing or require a reader to return and read again and again and again to extract meaning. We wanted things to be a little bit more forthcoming and straightforward in our selections. And then, of course, have some sort of regional tie.
Yeah. And I think for one of the things that I was most excited about with this project was that blending of oral storytelling tradition and literary tradition. And so, like Aimee's saying, sometimes literary stories can get a little convoluted, is a nice way to say it. It can be, you're really having to read and reread to understand what's going on. So trying to find these stories that fit with a really high elevated prose that have beautiful craft, but are still kind of following this oral storytelling tradition of, you can imagine it being read out loud. Like at our event, our launch event, people were reading their works out loud, and they worked so beautifully and felt so differently to hear orally. But that was definitely, I think, in all of our minds, was like, how is this marriage between literary and oral storytelling coming to life in these stories in front of us?
Yeah, and because some of them do follow literary conventions where they're grouped, they're broken up into sections and things like that. So there are some, and there are some that are very short and almost anecdotal, and they exist as these, micro vignettes. And then you have some that do take advantage of the full 300,000 word limit. But I did notice that while many of them kind of lent themselves to being read aloud or spoken aloud, there were some that seemed very literary, and it was maybe hard to envision them coming off the page and being told around a campfire. So were you looking for a kind of mix along those lines?
Definitely. We were looking at the collection more holistically, I would say. So making sure that the collection is hitting these markers as a whole. And then there's some pieces that are, so strongly rooted in Spokane, and then pieces that are not even set in Spokane at all, or the Spokane surrounding area. And then some pieces that, really lean into that sonic quality that are phenomenal to be read aloud, but maybe are less rooted in narrative. And then what was my other one that I had? I don't remember.
Who's to say? But no, I think that was definitely something. I remember we had another long night. Actually, this time it was in Aimee's living room, trying to order the collection once we'd figured out which submissions we wanted to accept, whether they had that really stellar oral storytelling tradition, or they were just gorgeous literary stories, or some combo of both. And then we were sitting down with what we physically had in front of us, and we all kind of independently came up with a list of what we thought the order should be, and then we compared the lists, and it was so cool because we had a lot of overlap and a lot of places where we had no overlap. And so those were a lot of just really interesting conversations we got to have about how to go with the flow of the collection as a whole. Like, if you are imagining your perfect reader who is sitting down and reading cover to cover, which we totally don't expect anyone to do, but how would their experience be impacted if you are going from this story into this next one, and maybe some variety in terms of like the pacing of the stories themselves, the length of the stories, and just like their content as well. So I don't know if that answers what you're...
It answers. Not only does it do that, it preempts something that I wanted to talk about, which was the sequencing, because the sequencing is an art that a lot of folks don't pay attention to. Even when you think of music, because we live in such a song-driven culture now, that the idea of the album and the flow of an album sometimes seems like an ancient art. And with this, I noticed that the sequencing, there was definitely a logic behind it. So it does sound like you paid close attention to how these stories would flow one to the next.
That's awesome. That's
I'm really glad to hear that. We were thinking about albums, actually. We were thinking about what are the notes we want to hit right out of the gate, and how do we want to close and pull it all together. And
Well, there you go. And the note that you hit out of the gate is very campfire story-ish because it has a surreal, eerie quality. This is Sam's story. And this is someone, the most unreliable of unreliable narrators.
Yes.
So Can you talk about why you chose Sam's story? The title escapes me, but
He's gone.
He's gone. There we go. But this was a story where nothing is certain, and it sets the collection off on this very uncertain foot. So if you could talk about why that was your opening note.
Yeah.
I feel like for me it was the dialogue.
Yes.
The dialogue drives that story and does such a good job.
I think it's just a really immersive story too. It's punchy, it's fast, it's exciting, and yeah, the dialogue is killer. And it's got this kind of, like you're saying, this like, do we know what's happening? Are we in this kind of like fake world? Is this narrator even remotely, I don't like saying reliable for narrators, but can we trust what's happening? And maybe no, maybe we really shouldn't. And there's maybe a ghost like that's hitting all of these things thematically, but then just in general, it's a great story. Sam Ligon's fantastic. So it was an easy choice.
Yeah, and the supernatural and the eerie does emerge as a theme, as you would expect throughout this. I think of the Wrath Drum ghosts, which is something that I was unfamiliar with. Can you talk about this story that and I should also note that I really appreciate the sort of contextual epilogues that exist to these stories to kind of make sense of what you just wrote, just read, or help frame it a little more solidly. So yeah, there was a story about the Wrath Drum ghosts, which is or Wrath Drum witches, which is like 7 hooded figures with interlocked arms. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated by this story. I've been a huge fan of this story for a while.
This is Curtis Ebling's story Room Sound that we're talking about right now.
So this story is definitely more on the literary side. Curtis is a poet by trade, so I like the sonic quality of the story is so strong, and so he concerned himself a lot with aesthetics. So as these witches are committing this act of murder, the witches are very concerned with aesthetics. And then to complement that, there's this film crew that is also very concerned with aesthetics and unfortunately less concerned with the human people in front of them who have experienced this tragedy. And so watching the way that those things speak to each other is really fun, even though it is about murder.
It is. But this is one of the ones where we got to have a lot of fun playing with it because, like Aimee said, Curtis is a poet and it's just beautiful language, and it's more vignetted. It's a little bit more murky about what's going on. And so I do think that historical note at the end does a lot of work to contextualize and ground you in what's happening. But yeah, I love that story.
Well, and Morganne as a designer got to play around a lot with how does this look on the page? How does this present to the reader? Which also was another added layer of concern with aesthetics.
Yeah, that was fun to work with. So
you sort of co-designed the cover, if I'm not mistaken.
This was Aimee's baby, I would say.
You advised me so greatly during this process.
You did the beautiful illustrations. But yeah, Aimee's a fantastic visual artist. My background's also in the visual arts. So it's been just such a joy to get to, we're at everyone's houses all the time. Sit on my porch and like look at the cover up until like midnight of the day before I think we sent to print for the big run. But yeah, you did an amazing job. It's gorgeous.
So did you. And thank you.
And in addition to the visual design, you also are a contributor. So you edited and did the visual design and contributed to this. Your story has these parallels with the deer and the fox, and we see some of these anthropomorphized traits appearing in the human characters. If you could talk about your story and maybe provide a little more context to that.
Ooh. I presented this story at a class I was teaching at the library because I was like, I need to be brave for my students, which is also, thematic in my story. And so I showed a very early draft of this, and they were like, we really want there to be a 1-for-1. This character is this animal, this character is this animal, this character is this animal. And I think that it's not quite a 1-to-1. I don't think that anybody is completely fox or deer or bear, but I think that they all embody characteristics of some. And I do think that the fox, of course, is the strongest and most central character to the story. And so I feel like the fox demonstrates a lot of choice for the protagonist in my story. So I like the choice aspect, even though my protagonist is not quite as, I don't know, industrious as the fox, maybe.
Well, and that muddiness, that ambiguity is one of those qualities that helps a work linger with you after you've closed the book or after you've switched off the screen. The fact that something is not wholly black or white and maybe captures some of the grayness of the world. And so, that ambiguity that was captured in your story, where they do share similarities with kind of their spirit animals, maybe, but they are not one thing or the other. Is certainly something that kind of lends itself to its memorability.
And I think I was like, oh, well, we're writing this literary collection that is for an adult audience, probably somebody who already has a past of reading literary work, is interested in this genre of fiction. And so I was like, I need to really lean into the literary qualities of this story that I think in another world could be a very straight campfire story.
Yeah, and your story also kind of alludes to this oral tradition as well, because these stories were passed down. So was that intentional?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
My grandmother.
Okay. And you bring up a point that I kind of wanted to talk about in the genesis of this and Banana Slug. This all kind of traces its roots back to the hive at the library, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? That process that ultimately birthed this the collection and the press.
I was notified of my hive residency just a few days before I defended my thesis at Eastern, which was very exciting. So I knew it was on the horizon. And then it was so funny. The very first day I was supposed to go to the hive, I remember I was sitting in Morganne's house submitting my application for the Saga grant. And
it's a very
for
big
Campfire
moment.
Stories, it was a huge moment.
Yeah.
Now we're here.
I know.
But then Eva Silverstone at the Hive is just such an incredible mentor and model of what it means to be an artist living in community and friend. And so she was there like every step of the way, and it was so sweet. So her mentorship, and then the creative community at the Hive. As I was working on this, my studio mate Daria Pilgrim, who was on this podcast not too long ago.
She was talking about kintsugi and then all the stuff in Hilliard that she's involved with. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So a lot of times I was working on Campfire Stories, and she was in our studio doing kintsugi, and she's very wise in the ways of business, and so she was giving me a lot of her wisdom, and I was like, thank you so much. They really maybe they do not teach you as much of that as you need to know in an MFA program because you're so busy learning about the craft.
I will say we've learned a lot of craft, and Lena Crow taught us a lot about business. But in terms of like having a press, I think there was a lot, Aimee, that you've learned on the fly, and that I think the rest of us as editors have tried to support you with. But you've done the lion's share for sure of just learning about the different, oh my gosh, all the legalities and little things, hoops to jump through. So,
there's no manual for this.
No, YouTube tutorials can only take you so far.
And was your residency for visual art or for literature?
It was for literature. I primarily received the Hive residency to work on my novel that I'm working on. It's another camp novel, or another camp themed work of literature. And so I did that, and then I also am a block printer, and so I was doing a lot of nature inspired block prints that were complementing my work.
I see. And so back to Spokane Campfire Stories, we've talked about the eerie and the supernatural that certainly crops up. There's also this association that you would expect with place. And one of the things that occurred to me is that I think Spokane has a unique fascination for enjoying seeing its landmarks reflected on the page. Jess Walter, this has made Jess Walter kind of a local celebrity, not least because he's an exceptionally capable and award-winning writer, but he reflects Spokane back to Spokane in a way that Spokane recognizes.
Yes.
Was that some of your intent? And then, with these stories, did you ever feel like there was some gratuitous name dropping, or did you feel like every author really wrote about the place or the landmarks that they were citing, and they were an integral part to the story?
That's such a good question.
I don't think anything felt gratuitous to me. I will say I am from the East Coast, so Spokane is not my home. So it maybe and I've been here 2 years, so maybe I am not yet like embedded enough in the culture of Spokane to feel any gratuity. But I think about Emily Gwynn's story, Natatorium Park, and just how intentional she was with all the history of that place. Or I think about like Lena's story. To me, they all felt very important, I would say. Locations felt tied to character, tied to the overall movement of whatever the story was, which shows up in different ways, of course. But
yeah, and I think of a story, one of the stories that leaps to mind is The Center. And the reason it takes its name is because it begins with the geographical center of Spokane and then talks about kind of mapping that. But yeah, there are many stories in here where place names and landmarks, and whether you're talking about Broadway or Division or the Garbage Goat or whatever it happens to be, they are referenced. And and maybe this is something that readers could, on second, third, and fourth readings, maybe savor or maybe ponder a little bit more, is just how tied is this place to the story, and also, does it end up limiting some of this? Because with Spokanites, we see these things and we recognize and we know what they mean. We know what the garbage goat means. We know, so you just have to mention the garbage goat and people say, aha, I know all the qualities that evokes. So do you think that the geographical, that geographical core, that geographical center is limiting, or does this almost act as an ambassador for Spokane where people can read it and then get a better feel for the city?
I think maybe it does limit its audience in some ways, and I think
that's
that,
okay.
Yeah. I feel great that it's found its audience. It knows who it's for, and I feel like that core feels really strong. But then I think people, like visitors, like my parents came recently, and I think that they can enjoy this collection for their limited Spokane experiences that they've had since I moved here.
Well, I think a lot about audience too, and like not every detail of a story, a novel, a collection, whatever, has to be for every reader. So I do think I think that this is a book very much founded in community, and that community is Spokane. So I think it's kind of nice sometimes to have that, like what you're saying, of like Spokane can see itself in a way it's familiar with in maybe a work like this. But I do think too that like it's okay if maybe the garbage goat is not something that a reader from, let's say, New Hampshire can picture, but a reader who has lived in Spokane, visited Spokane, can immediately conjure up this wild sculpture with no trouble. I think it's, I don't think it's a problem to limit in some ways, because the hope in my heart at least is that there's enough familiarity, there's enough like closeness that it becomes almost accessible. With you have all of these details and you're building this portrait of a place and a city and a community, and maybe not everything is super understandable on its own, but when you put it all together, it makes a picture, hopefully. So I think in that way, I would like to imagine our book works a little bit as an ambassador for Spokane, but also if it's more purely for the community, this, as Aimee said, like this is such an incredible literary and artistic community that like it's kind of fun to be able to give something just back to this place that's been so genuinely kind to us. So
and sometimes that universality does spring from the very personal, and so if you have that specificity, sometimes, the universality emerges from it. And so I think
maybe someone else has a garbage.
Well, no,
idea.
I think that's what makes Spokane unique
Yeah,
is that,
you're right. I'm
not
so
everybody
sorry.
can claim a
That
garbage
was
goat.
blasphemous. Strike that. But yeah.
I think that a real asset to the collection too is its honesty, which maybe could potentially make it more expansive, but I also think it acknowledges the gritty nature of Spokane. And so I'm thinking in stories like What Happens When You Aren't Looking by Catherine Davenport.
And this was the angels, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that reminded me of the
Angels.
Weeping Angels from Doctor Who.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Or Elvis Doesn't Marry People Anymore by Allegra Armstrong, where the protagonist is a Spokane hater.
And you don't know where they are
Yeah.
until they must have been 3 or 4 pages in that the Spokane River gets its first mention. So all she's talking about, if I remember correctly, is just the neighborhood and how the neighborhood is crummy and doesn't. I paid attention during that story, or I became aware of the fact that it hadn't specified that it's in Spokane until later on, and then we see the Spokane River.
But I think that that's beautiful. Spokane
Yeah.
contains multitudes.
Yeah.
And so do our authors, and the way that the characters speak about and interact with, or the way that they navigate this complex space. And I think that other people who don't live in Spokane can see some of that probably reflected in their own city as well.
Yeah, that's another place, I think, for sure. And that was another thing we were thinking about as we were like putting together the shape of the book, of like, Spokane's complicated. Like, we have a lot happening in this place, and so I'm glad that we have those stories and more included in this collection. It does feel more like an honest portrayal, and just like, it just feels better to have a fuller picture, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected in the breadth of its submissions. And some of the themes, again, I've made reference to the eeriness, but there's also the history. You'd referenced Nat Park. And there's also this environmental theme. And again, it's not something that would have leapt to mind when I think of Spokane, but when some of the authors were talking about forest fires, I think the same story references that we were just talking about, where Spokane doesn't emerge as the place until a bit later, is talking about climate change conference. And then, there are other things like, dryness or drought and all of these, meteorological conditions or climate conditions emerge. Did that strike you when you were looking at the submissions? Did you say, hey, we've kind of got this thing that's tied to place, but the climate of the place as well?
I'm not even sure if that was very intentional, or just that I do think people who live in Spokane are watching a lot of effects of climate change play out. And then I think that this collection has a pretty significant number of emerging authors who fall within the Gen Z or millennial category of people. And I think that Gen Z and millennial people are very concerned with climate change. A lot of the writers that we know personally write significantly about climate change.
Yeah, for sure.
I write a lot about climate change.
I think it's just a very prevalent thing on everyone's minds. And like, literally right now, the Spokane River is dried up.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it wasn't something that we were having conversations per se about, like, oh, we're noticing these climate threads are popping up. And maybe this is dark and bad, but it just feels very like normal.
Well, maybe this is a case of the specificity speaking to the universality. Here they are talking about the specifics of Spokane and, forest fires and smoke and that sort of thing. But it speaks to this universal concern and this thing that's weighing on, I would argue, more than Gen Z and millennial minds. That,
fair.
although unfortunately it's not weighing on the minds that it should. But this preoccupation and this just existential dread that comes with climate change, and you can see that, recurring in these stories.
And the fires do feel very Spokane. Like, we do not have forest fires like this. I'm from Maine. They don't exist there. Getting here, I landed here 2 years ago in that, I think it was the really bad forest fire in August, and the smoke and the air was just crazy. I'd never had anything like that. So it makes a lot of sense to me to see these kinds of themes emerging in the book. But I am, and like Aimee said, I think it's just something that a lot of the writers that we know and a lot of the writers included in this collection just organically are working with themes like that. So
yeah, the forest fires are very different to a nor'easter.
yeah. Just a little. But
and I guess as we kind of wrap up, one of the things I'm intrigued to know is, do you have any personal favorites? Aimee, I would have to say you're not allowed to choose your own. So
I would not,
because I could sit here and talk about all the historical themes, and I'm sure we could spend an episode on each piece because there's there's something noteworthy in each. But I don't know if you had any particular highlights.
that's such a hard
And we're
question.
not playing favorites. It's okay to like or to have one piece speak to you more than the other.
I mean, it's hard not to answer Squatchet. Ashley's story is just, there's oysters like in the first paragraph, so that's gonna get me going, and
And a banana slug.
and a banana slug. So, but I think there's so many good stories in this collection. I don't know.
It's so hard to
That's
choose.
a terrible question.
I know. One that really, really spoke to me is While You're Twisting, I'm Still Breathing by Lena Quivola.
Yeah.
As soon as I read it, I was like, it's so Spokane, and these characters feel so real. This
story
artist
made me-
couple.
Yeah, it made me want to cry, and I actually did cry reading
Me
that
too.
the first time. I was like, oh no. And I won't spoil the last line of it, but when we were talking, and I keep talking about the ordering of the book, but my head goes there a lot. That last line of Lena's story, so this is the last story in our collection, I think it encompasses perfectly what we were wanting to do with the book itself. Like, we will come to know him and love him as he wants to be known is a terrible paraphrasing of that, which is kind of like how we're showing Spokane. Like, we want you to know and love Spokane.
Vertebrae by vertebrae.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good one.
So good.
Yeah, and I think it's standouts for me, and there's no accounting for taste, and it's whatever happens to resonate with you. And I could hear, for example, Kate Lebo. I could hear Kate in that story,
Absolutely.
and her preoccupations with food and gardening, and then creating that very just evocative environment that speaks to urban agriculture and things like that was just something that I found memorable. And when I think of what just kind of lingers on the brain after the book is closed, that was one of them.
That's a really
that's
beautiful one.
We're so lucky to have that story.
We are. I know. We're so lucky to have all of
Yeah.
these. But yeah.
And finally, before I forget, Banana Slug. What's the deal with the Banana Slug?
I am a Texan from the desert. I am from a land of no moisture. Barely rains. Also here, there's not that much rain, but there's a little bit more, and also there's a river. And then I came here and I saw a slug, and I was like, I think I've been forever changed.
Yeah. It's a big moment.
What did you find so transformative about the slug? What is it? The size? Was it the
Oh, it was just everything.
Because there's slugs. There's slugs, and then there's banana
It's-
slugs.
yeah,
Yeah.
A huge
They're
slug.
the size of a human. Yeah.
Yeah, they take over.
Yeah.
I touched the slug.
You're not supposed to do that.
You're not supposed to do that because you can get parasites through your skin. But I didn't, probably.
You're still here. It's
I'm
okay.
still here and probably parasite free. But I don't know. I was like, this is a creature that I've never seen before, and I'm obsessed with it.
And it's very specific to here too. Like my mother just found out that a banana slug is a real thing, and she said, "How terrifying! Do they eat bananas?" Sorry, Mom, but so I think I hadn't seen one until I came here either. It's weird. They're cool.
Well, and our editorial team is 3/4 transplants.
Yeah.
So Texas,
Maine.
Maine, and Boston area.
Yeah.
And so then we have Katy Shedlock who keeps us grounded
Very
and who
deeply
also kept
rooted in
saying more
Spokane.
Spokane. She would say put more Spokane in her story. And I was like, this is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe we were all enamored.
I think we were.
And you had this.
The slug has our hearts. What can
Yeah.
we say?
The slug stole my heart.
A new sticker.
Yeah.
Hashtag the slug stole my heart.
you had this launch event on the 22nd. And you got to take this the page and the literary and make it oral. So I think that's kind of a nice kind of coda to this whole endeavor, and combining the print with the oral. What is next for Spokane Campfire Stories? Is there going to be a Spokane Campfire Stories 2? What's going on with Banana Slug? Are you going to start publishing more novels? Yeah, I'm curious.
I think I will never say no to Spokane Campfire Stories 2. The National Parks anthology that inspired a lot of this. They have their second volume is out. That team seems like they're doing really well, and they're probably on to their third now. They've got a bunch of merch and stuff, which is cool. We've been talking just yesterday.
That was last night.
Yeah, that was last night, which is wild. So we're looking for more grants. We are looking for our next theme, which the one discussed, the multiple ones discussed. I would say are in the same vein though. Not necessarily campfire stories, but people at the core and nature, and we talked a lot about building more connections, potentially statewide and beyond.
Yeah, so we're really excited. So stay tuned. We're we literally just met last night to talk kind of about, wow, we did it. The launch happened. That was awesome. What do we do now? But I think we'll definitely have another book coming. We're trolling for grants right now and kind of prepping. There's a project that we're softly thinking about in the works that we need to shape up a little more and start applying for grants for. But it's exciting.
Okay, so watch this space.
Yeah,
okay.
Watch.
And in the meantime, hashtag the slug stole my heart.
Yes, exactly. Cool. We should put that on our website. The slug stole my heart is just the byline.
Perfect.
So just a few seconds ago when I said, okay, finally, as we wrap up, I saw, a little bristle. Are you prepared for the second part of the interview? No, I see the look of terror. That's appropriate. So we close every interview after we talk. We stay on topic for a little while, and then we close with a lightning round.
Okay.
Ooh.
So yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad to see you embracing the challenge. This is nothing that's going to put your knowledge on the spot. This is just a way for us to tease things out a little bit more.
I love it.
First question, always an either or.
Uh-oh.
Call or text?
Text.
Call.
Oh, I will have you tease out those answers. Why text?
Because it feels faster, because you can ignore it if you need to.
More efficient, and it allows you to to shut out the other person while still maintaining social graces.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. I'm bad at texting. I'm really bad at texting, and so I will call. You've been the recipient of many of my calls for something that should have been a text. So yeah. And yet we're still here.
Yeah, I'm a call person myself. I would always rather just get the call. I find it's more efficient.
Yeah,
and
I find hands.
And then you get this back and forth with the text and call. Is just like, can we suss this out?
You're trying to figure out plans. You're trying to figure out where you're meeting and when. It's just like, hey, I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
And you're done. It's
exactly.
good.
You have already answered this next question in part. Are you an avid camper? And you said you were a camp counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So, here we have campfire stories. Did they stem from, frequent camping?
Honestly, I've not camped that much, and I don't camp that much. I did work at a backpacking camp though.
Okay.
So I've done some time.
Yeah, I would say that's
in the dirt.
You've done some time.
But I don't do that much time in the dirt these days. And I think I'm okay with that.
Oh, I was going to say, is that a lament? Do you want to get out more in the woods? But
I think I do, but I also don't do it. So I don't know. I'm at peace with whatever
That's
happens.
Beautiful, Aimee.
You're at peace with being an urbanite.
Yeah, okay. I think so. And if the dirt calls to me, I will answer.
Okay. I'm sensing many hashtags here.
We've got a lot of things happening.
Are you an avid camper?
I wouldn't say avid the past few years, but I do love to camp. And the dirt, I miss the dirt. I'd like to be in the dirt, I think is my final answer on this. I tragically did not get a camp, at all here out west. Actually, no, that's not true. We camped in Nevada. I think we were driving down to California, and we.
And who's
the night.
we in this story?
Me.
This is not Aimee, but a couple other people from the MFA. We went to Community of Writers, and we drove from Spokane all the way down to Lake Tahoe area, and we stopped and we camped in. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Nevada, and there were Mormon crickets, which are crazy. They're huge. They're giant, and they were all over everything, and that was wild, and I almost decided I didn't want to camp again, but it was really nice. That's the only camping out west I've done, but I do love to camp.
Excellent. So we're going to get a little philosophical. Now, we're going to try to practice brevity, but this is a pretty big topic, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. What is the role, and actually, Aimee, you went first last time,
Oh,
so Morganne, what is the role, if any, of AI in literature?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and
No.
I know we're opening a potential can of
are
worms, but
opening-
I wondered if you had any succinct
These are
thoughts
not
on
worms
this.
I want in my dirt. Succinct thoughts. I am a little bit terrified of AI's role in the arts, coming from a visual arts background, even like while in the MFA, like seeing like our professors be like, oh, AI is being trained on my writing, my work's been stolen, and they're training it on this. Like, it's very scary, but I don't succinctly, there's no way AI can write what human people write. Like, I think we come to literature, we come to art for that human connection, for the kind of someone sees me who's never seen me before, or there is this universal aspect of being known that you turn to art for. And AI can't do that.
Now, if there is and maybe this is getting away from the succinct, but if there is a human who is, generating AI prompts to maybe flesh out, and maybe that's the wrong word, to maybe augment their own literature, would you frown on that?
I don't even use the self-checkout lane. I'm not a good person to ask these questions. I know that we're supposed to be excited about tools that come to us, but I do think it feels, I don't know, it feels scary to me, and I know that we shouldn't turn away from things that are terrifying, but I just think there's a lot of ethical concerns with using AI. And I guess what you're saying, like, if there's a writer who's using AI prompts to flesh out their own writing, do you mean more on the side of like the drafting phase, like saying like, oh, if I do X, what are things that I should be thinking about?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of
Or- 'cause there's a
potential
lot of ways
nuance
you
to
can-
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I didn't have anything specific in mind.
Okay.
I was just thinking of someone, who's maybe writing a core text and then using AI, even creatively in some way.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Speaking confessionally,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sit well with me. And then
Yeah.
I think the kind of point of the exercise is to say, like, why doesn't that sit well with me? And then, again, that could take many hours of navel gazing to.
I think it's got to do with the implied trust and like shared vulnerability that you're entering an art piece with. Like, there is this level of like, I'm coming to a work and I don't know what's going to be there, so I'm showing up fully and wholly, and you're coming into that work with the expectation that the creator, whoever that is, has also shown up with that same level of vulnerability, I think.
Yeah.
And so I do think that might be why it's sitting kind of weird to us to be like, this is partly done with AI? Like, what do you mean? Like, you maybe weren't in the thick of it the way that I'm in the thick of it, and then that connection piece is kind of severed to a degree. And maybe that's something that we're going to have to learn to work with, but I don't know.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
Food for thought there. Aimee, you've had some time to kind of formulate your own thoughts on this.
I only see rage when I think about AI. One time, one of my former students turned in an AI paper, and I could feel my eyes start to vibrate inside my skull because I was like, I've given you every opportunity to be your full self. I wasn't grading on grammar. I wanted them to develop their own voice in their writing, whether they were writing academically or creatively, and they outsourced it. I was irate. And so whenever I hear about AI, sometimes I can feel my heart start to pound with anger. And so I want to be open to new tools and ideas. And I don't know, I think I could see a world in which I look back on some of the things that I've said about AI and I'm like, wow, I was like living in the dark ages or something. But maybe I'm okay with that. I try to avoid AI as much as possible. I think for the environmental implications as well as the creative implications. I've been reading about, you know, some major effects that AI has had on people psychologically, and then cognitively as well, even though those things go very hand in hand with the damage that it's doing to the brains of youth and adults, and then the ways that it is outsourcing the human experience and people are using it as friends, and that's becoming really dangerous. And I think sitting with the uncomfortable, creating can be painful, and it can be deeply joyful too.
And it should be both. Like, that's the vulnerability piece. Like, we are having pain and joy when we experience art too. Like, we're all here together. Sorry.
No, I completely
feel a lot of feelings.
Yes, we should feel a lot of feelings.
No, and I think, you know, this is worthy. It's not as though AI has gone without discussion, but it's certainly worthy of, you know, further exploration, further thought, and further teasing it out. Because, when I have that instinctive reaction, my first thought is, yes, pure rage. And then, but then also kind of analyzing like, okay, so what is the basis for that knee-jerk reaction? And it's interesting because it came up almost as a tangential subject in a recent interview here, where we're talking about AI and spectacle and how AI is capable of spectacle. But what it came down to really, and I think this speaks to your point, Morganne, is just authenticity. And we expect a certain amount of authenticity from our writers, which is why we don't like plagiarism. And so it's that authenticity. And when that authenticity is lost, it really does call the whole human experience, the creative experience into question. So.
Yeah, very much.
Well, to quote the great Joseph Edward Hager, what it really comes down to is being helpless.
Yeah.
And so
it is true. No, and the environmental concerns, like how much water AI uses, like we can make our own shopping lists, friends. It's gonna be okay. But anyways, rage is a good word, Aimee. Vibrating eyes.
So I mean, maybe this ties into the final question, although maybe I hope it ends on a slightly lighter note. Is something, or what are you kind of snobby about?
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm really snobby sometimes.
I love that, first of all.
And I'm proud.
So, you know, in this case, we might be snobby about the use of AI. But Aimee, what outside of AI, what are you potentially snobby about?
Outside of the literary realm, I'm really snobby about coffee.
That makes sense.
About coffee, okay.
Yeah.
Where does your snobbiness emerge in the literary realm?
In the literary realm, I think some overdone themes I feel like I don't have the taste for, and I like can't stomach them sometimes.
Okay.
And so no.
Don't go on that soapbox yet.
Inside thoughts inside. I cannot alienate myself from my future audiences. But I think I enjoy things that are fresh and new, and work that is
challenging
and character driven. Even though we just made a place-based collection, but I wanted all of these stories to feel really character driven.
So coffee and character driven literature.
Coffee and character.
Oh, cool.
Okay. I feel like everything that I could possibly say is running from my mind. I don't know. I feel like I don't know. You know me pretty well. What am I snobby about?
Ugly books.
Oh, ugly books make me really sad.
Can you give me a for instance of an ugly book?
Oh my gosh.
No, but I'll give you an imaginary ugly book.
Okay, yeah. Let's
set the
create
scene.
a straw man ugly book.
Ooh, and keep in mind, we are learning as we go too. So someday I will look back maybe on our books and say, that was an ugly book, Morganne. We could have done better. But actually, I think we made a really beautiful book. So I don't believe in that. But I think in general, here's a very niche snobbiness with book design that I've only recently learned about as of coming to this program in working for Willow Springs Books is widows and orphans within a book, which are the little lines or words that are separated from their families, basically, from the paragraph or the line.
Their name is so tragic.
Yeah.
Someone has to stand
But
up for them.
deliberately tragic. I mean,
It
I
is.
think, because you're supposed to recoil from them and
you wanna
pity
mourn.
them. Yeah,
Definitely. It's a tragic, sad thing. And I feel like I get, or if the justification's not great, or just the book design and the interiors, I've learned a lot about, and now it's really hard not to see it. And so every time I do pick up a book, I'm looking at like the leading and the kerning, and I'm seeing like, oh, there's a lot of hyphens on that page, and that's okay. We can have some, but maybe that's a lot. But I don't want to be too snobby, because very recently we did not know a lot ourselves. So it is a world where we can all learn and do better and not have ugly books.
Yeah, and that's a YouTube tutorial that both exists and is also waiting to be created and updated as well.
And we can link it on our website. Maybe not.
When we're on Skillshare in the future.
I think information should be accessible for all, and we can all make beautiful things. Yeah. And also just design choices in general. When they're bad, I'm sad.
A fitting way to end a talk about Spokane Campfire Stories and publishing in general. So, Morganne, Aimee, thank you so much for coming in today and talking about this.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, it's been lovely.